My name's AJ Jackson. I'm from Wake Forest, North Carolina. I go to UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm double majoring in management and sports administration with a minor in entrepreneurship. Hope you enjoy this episode of the podcast.
This is Man to Men, the premier audio journal for men who live faithfully and lead courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove with you for another in-depth conversation with a courageous leader, and today we welcome Aaron Wren. He's the co-founder and senior fellow at the American Reformer and author of the book, Life in the Negative World, Confronting Challenges in an Anti-Christian Culture. And that book and that conversation continues to fuel a lot of thinking and impact, particularly with evangelicals and Christians. He has also appeared in a number of leading global publications, including The Guardian, The Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, and many others. And we've got him here today on Man to Men. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I've really benefited, brother, from your writing and thinking most recently. And we're going to talk about some of that today. But I wanted to begin just because you are a man of Christian faith who has worked largely in consulting, urban policy, and now as a leading voice in kind of faith-based and cultural thought. Would you share with us where your journey with Jesus Christ began and how has that impacted your professional decisions? It doesn't have to be the short version.
Yeah, well, I'm from Catholic peasant stock on both sides of my family, and I was actually baptized in a Catholic church. But my mother got very involved in the Catholic charismatic renewal movement in the 1970s, and that essentially led her out of the Catholic Church and into Pentecostalism. So I never made it to First Communion in a Catholic church. I didn't even get that far. I was just baptized there. And then I was raised in a rural Assemblies of God church in southern Indiana. I grew up about 4 miles outside of a town of fewer than 100 people. The exact number varies by census, but I don't think it's ever been more than 100 there. It was a little bit, it's like these things, you look back on your life and you don't really realize the extent to which your life was bound up with cultural trends. So, for example, the Catholic Charismatic Renewal Movement, when I was a teenager, I couldn't have told you anything about that, even though it had a big impact on my life. But it was also sort of part of the Back to the Land movement as well. As we had lived on the edge of town and we sort of moved to a more rural area. In part, I think, due to end times theology, we're going to have to live off the land when there's a tribulation and things like that was there. But this was very much in the culture war mode. I grew up there, went off to university, and, really never, wasn't really living as a Christian, to be quite honest. And, I would always said I believed in God. I probably prayed and things like that. But, the way I was living my life, I didn't go to church, just kind of did whatever normal people did, in college and then in my early career in Chicago. So I moved to Chicago after college, went to work in management consulting. Really enjoyed living in that city. And I got married when I was like 32, and that marriage ended in divorce. And it was really surprisingly traumatic for me that happened, because by all accounts should have been an easy divorce in that we didn't have any debt, we didn't have any pets, we didn't have any kids, all of that sort of thing. But I'd never really experienced any genuine adversity in life up to that point. I'd sort of been living on autopilot. I really was kind of very lazy, to tell you the truth. But everything had gone well. I got great grades, went off to college, got a great job, all of that stuff, got promotions. And this really, realized I was like, very fragile, to use this Taleb term. And, like a lot of people, when you run into personal problems in your life, you get interested in Jesus again. So it's very prosaic. So that sort of was a catalyst to, going back to church, and ultimately ended up, I guess you would say, a little bit connected with the New Calvinist movement. Definitely urban church in the kind of call it cultural engagement world, as I've described it. I'm Presbyterian today, and so that was sort of like how I got there from a faith perspective. But it really didn't affect my career per se. Although, I can see that God played a huge role in it. I don't want to go into the story because we can go off on tangents about my life as much as possible if you want, but like how I got my job in Chicago.
We got time.
Well, maybe we can come back to that in a little bit if you want to hear that story about how I actually got my job in Chicago.
I'd love to hear it right now.
Well,
part of your story.
I'm in college, and I was a finance major, and I realized that I really hated the idea of going to work in a bank. And in the meantime, I'd gotten really into computer programming, and I loved it. I would sometimes stay up all night in the computer lab just hacking away on systems. I was actually very good at software, and I decided what I want to do is work in software, and then that would be my dream job. And so, I'm going through, the interview process through our business placement office at Indiana University. It's the undergrad business school there has an incredible placement office. All these corporations just come to campus. And if you want an interview, you just literally sign up to interview with them. It actually is that easy. And at the same time, somebody posted on one of the forums, hey, the university itself is hiring a network administrator. It's an $8 an hour job as sort of a technician level person. And I'm like, I'm not like a network expert. I could do that job. I said, I'm going to apply for that job because it's a computer job. In the meantime, I applied for a job with a company that was then called Andersen Consulting. It's now known as Accenture. It was one of the companies everyone wanted to work for. They wanted to either work in consulting at Andersen or they wanted to be a brand manager at Procter & Gamble. So I signed up like everybody else to interview with Andersen. So I go, this is like prior to the World Wide Web. So what does this company do? Consulting. So I go to the placement office, I get their literature, and it's like, we help our clients change to be more successful. What does that mean precisely? So then I go into the interview, and this guy goes, Aaron, are you on the radio? I said, well, actually, I'm not a radio personality, but I work for the campus NPR station, classical station, and they sometimes say my name in the credits. It's like, oh yeah. So we sat there and talked about like classical radio NPR stuff for the interview. He's like, oh, we'll get you up for an office interview. So I go up to Chicago for an office interview, and I walk in there. It's this partner, Dan Beagley. I ended up working for him, was a great guy. And he just starts pounding on his desk. This is the best effing consulting company on the planet, and you would be an effing idiot if you don't work here.
Wow,
any questions?
Right.
And I'm like,
confident.
No. And then I go to lunch. It's like every interview, some variation of that. It's people that are not telling me anything about the company, nor really asking me any questions. And I come to the end of it, and they send me a job offer. I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm get this offer from this company, and it's vague what they do. I don't really know what the company does. I mean, the last question they asked, I still remember these people. Sherry Sunderman. She's like, I'm your closer here. Do you have any other questions? Nobody didn't ask. Well, I'm like, well, I'd like to ask, what does this company actually do? But obviously, you can't ask that question. And I was smart enough to know you can't ask that question. So in the meantime, I'd actually applied for this job as a land administrator, even got an interview. I didn't hear anything back from them. I was waiting. And I'd already resolved, if I get the land administrator job, I'm turning down the consulting job, and I'm taking the land administrator job. And as all this is going on, I'm praying a lot. This is what I mean. Like, I wasn't really going to church or doing anything of that nature, but, when I wanted something, I would pray. I never prayed for anything more in my life, most likely, than to get the land administrator job, because I'm like, this is what I want to do. This is the only way I know to get it. So finally, I'm like, I got to give these Andersen guys an answer. So I follow up with the land administrator guys. Are like, oh yeah, we didn't hire you, we hired somebody else. So I was very disappointed in that. And then, so I accept the Andersen job. I move to Chicago. I show up at the office, and it turns out that what Andersen Consulting actually did was build and install software systems for large corporations. And so I spent, first 18 or so years of my career doing technology work in Chicago. And so it was I was going to, it's one of these many providential things. I was going to make a very dumb decision, but that dumb decision got foreclosed to me and brought me into a better place.
I like the Lord.
But anyhow, I'd also, along the way, I got really interested in cities. I came from a small town. People say, I love cities like only somebody from a small town like that can. And,
Right.
and I really felt like, wow, I have a lot of insights on the city that I'm not hearing from other people. So I started a blog. It was called the Urbanophile, the Lover of Cities. And it ended up really taking off. And within a year, it started getting media attention. And somebody sent me a link to a contest from the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. Look, it was a global innovation competition looking for ideas to improve public transit in Chicago. So I entered and I won. And so like, wow. And I got my picture on the cover of the Chicago Tribune as a result of that. And I'm like, well, maybe there's something here. I really like this. I have something to say in it. I was becoming disenchanted with the consulting world. It was moving in different directions. There's a lot more offshoring, outsourcing. I wasn't actually programming anything interesting anymore. I was just in management and all that. And I realized, like, man, if I want to progress in this company, I'm going to have to, like, really make some changes myself, go back on the road. Don't want to do that. So I left, my job there in order to try to pursue the professionalization of this urban policy track, which I had no idea what it would look like. I had some theories on what I was going to do. Well, it turned out to be vastly more difficult to make a career transition there than I thought. And I ended up, it was really like the worst 3 years of my life. This is kind of when, the marriage was collapsing. Everything went wrong for me for a period of 3 years in ways that I still can't quite make sense of. But ended up, it all worked out. I ended up in New York City as a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, which is a think tank there. I'm still a contributing editor of their magazine. I have an article coming out in the summer print edition, on a town here in Indiana. And so, it was kind of successful in making that transition. And again, so ended up in New York City, which I really wanted to live in New York City. It was great. Fell in love with the city all over again. Chicago was really great. New York, loved that as well. And, but it was about a decade ago that I started to see that men were turning to online influencers, but not the church. And I'm like, what's going on there? So I start looking into that and I start seeing, wow, these influencers actually have a lot of accurate information about the world. And the church is giving out bad information. No wonder people are turning to these guys. And if anything, that gap has only exploded over the last decade. Back in 2014, let's say 10 years ago, if I'd told you who these people were, you wouldn't have recognized a single name on the list. Well, now everybody knows Jordan Peterson. He's got millions of followers. There's multiple of these people who have millions of followers, often on a global basis, and the church has made no progress whatsoever. Frankly, it should be embarrassing to the church that, Jordan Peterson ate their lunch. I just went to see his tour that he's been on here in Indianapolis. His We Who Wrestle with God tour. It's about his new book. Comes out in the fall, which I gather is sort of a book version of his Genesis and Exodus lectures.
That's what I've gathered, yeah.
It's a 2,500 seat theater, and it's a 2,500 seat theater. It's sold out. The minimum ticket price in the upper balcony was over $100. And so basically, he's selling out theaters at high ticket prices in order for people to hear him give sermon on Genesis 12.
Right.
I'm like, he has people paying him hundreds of dollars to hear him preach sermons. And so the reality is that should have prompted a tremendous amount of, frankly, reflection, embarrassment, change in the church. It did not. And literally, there's been essentially no reform of the way the church approaches men in the last decade. It's very unfortunate. Right. But, I said, once again, I said, I think I have some insights into this. And just as with the urban stuff, I'd already essentially intellectually disrupted my way into one field, without going and getting a PhD and things of that nature. And so why not do it again? Let's give it a shot.
Not the traditional path.
Yeah. I said, I'm going to do things a lot differently this time than I did the last time, because I'm not going to overinvest in something that is not like leading something more quickly. I wasn't going to be as dumb as I was with the urban stuff. But it turned out, again, it went really well. And again, I've had, a lot of my work, again, if I'd seen anybody talking about men's issues in the church in the way that they wanted to be talked about, I wouldn't have walked away. I didn't want to do this. I wanted to go make some more money starting a website about microbiome health, and which I also saw coming, a decade ago. A lot of the stuff people talk about now was stuff I was on a decade ago. And I could have made some money, but I said, I'm going to go forward with mission and instead. And again, another interesting story. I said, here's what I'm going to do. God, I prayed about it a lot. I said, I'm going to start this newsletter. I got 35 guys who've agreed to become charter subscribers. If this thing spreads to 500 people by the end of year one, I'll keep doing it. If I don't hit 500 through word of mouth, I'm not going to advertise it or market it. It's just going to be a newsletter. If it spreads by word enough to 500, I'll keep doing it. If not, I'm going to shut it down. And as I came up on the end of year one, I had approximately 250 subscribers. I don't remember the exact number, which was if it were 496, I probably could have justified doing it, but that's not enough. Yeah. So I said, I'm shutting it down. And, I even notified all my charter subscribers I was shutting it down. And I said, well, this thing is not going to get where it is. So I'll just, rather than just talking about the men's stuff, I'll just give my 2 best ideas on any topics that are out there. One of which was the original version of what became my 3 worlds, known as my 3 worlds of evangelical piece.
Right, which eventually became the book, Life in the Negative World.
So I shut it down. I basically shut it down. I'm actually feeling good. I did it. It didn't hit the number, so I walked away. And then 2 weeks later, somebody sent it to Rod Dreher. He wrote this thing you guys got to read this and you better sign up to this guy's newsletter. And I got 1,500 subscribers from Rod Dreher overnight.
Wow. All right.
And so that
just a couple weeks off your goal.
Yeah. So it's is there now? I don't, I would say today I'm much less passive about things. If I had a goal I wanted to hit for the newsletter today, I'm going to take real action, to try to hit that. I don't suggest people take a totally passive approach to a metric like that.
That's good career advice.
Yeah. But, nevertheless, one of the things, this would be some maybe career advice is one of the things that, I did when I sort of made this transition into urbanism, I didn't really have any solid idea of what it would mean to succeed such that I could say, is this working or is this not working? And so when I did the Christian men's stuff, I said, I'm going to pre-commit to certain metrics that if I don't hit these metrics, I have to exit what I'm doing because we can't overinvest. It's very easy to end up with a sunk cost fallacy. You're doing this thing, you feel like you're making progress, but it's not actually turning into a job, or it's not really this business isn't going to succeed or whatever. So I said, in advance, 500. That's what it means. And multiple times I actually set thresholds and I said, here's what I have to do in order to continue this project. In fact, I actually shut the newsletter down a second time because it failed to hit. Basically, the second time it was more about the finances. I'm this thing has to start making money. And of course, again, I was way too passive about that. I wasn't nearly as active as I should have been on actually raising money and all of that. But nevertheless, I'm you're doing this stuff. It's sort of high risk material in a sense, in that it's a little contrarian. And, you're talking about these gender issues. You never know where you're going to get the hate mob, which fortunately I haven't gotten yet. But anyhow, I set those thresholds and, but then anyhow, that ended up getting a little corrected too. And I think now what I've basically said is I'm essentially all in because I've reached the point where I'm, sustainable in what I'm doing. I certainly have bigger aspirations, but I'm not gating myself out of the business, for failure to hit a metric. But I think those are things, if you want to start a business, and a lot of, with a lot of VC startups and things, it's the same thing. The company's going, it's surviving, but it's not growing. It's not going to hit the hockey stick. It's not going to hit the metrics. What do you do with that business? Yeah. And I think a lot of times you do a few things. You sell it, you close up shop, move on. Those are conversations that happen. And so when you're doing something, I think that's entrepreneurial, I think there's a lot of bad advice out there. So my brother wanted to be an actor. And, one of these, he would take classes with different ones and, they'd have people who are very successful come in. So he's like, and my brother was he became a professional actor. I mean, he got paid. I was like, not very many people get paid to act. He's in commercials.
That's
and things
true.
like that. And this guy walks in. I can't remember who it was, but he's like, if you have a plan B, you're not an actor. You need to get out. You can't have a plan. You need to be so committed because it's so hard to make it. You can't give yourself any outs. I don't know that that's really a great way to think about it because a lot of people have really done serious harm to their lives by trying to become an actor. And they've been working as like a waiter because the schedule demands is like you have to be able to like go to an audition at any time. It's crazy. So you can't really have like a great career. So it's like a lot of people massively overinvest in things that are not going to be successful. And so
you just don't have the
to
metrics to see where it's going to go.
Yeah. You can think about a lot of things there. I think that idea of, thinking about what success looks like in advance, very possible. But I would say definitely that the switch to what I'm doing now was motivated, kind of motivated by faith. And, I could say a little bit, it's a little bit like Ezekiel in the sense that, when God told Ezekiel, if you rebuke the people, and they don't repent, well, that's on them. But if you don't rebuke them, then it's on you. And so, of course, I'm not a prophet per se, but I'm like, okay, I have these insights. I can either keep my mouth shut or I can say some things. And if I say things, then it's on the people who hear it as to what to make of it. And again, they have to make their own prudential judgments about whether what I'm saying is true, accurate, etc. But one of my major goals and one of my major strategies and what I'm doing is to give people information that they are now accountable to God for how they do it. Like, I'm not necessarily the person who's going to redesign men's ministry in the evangelical church, but I'm pointing out, here's where you guys are saying things that aren't true. And of course, as I got into this, when I originally went into it, my thought was, well, these people are well-intentioned, but kind of ignorant on it. They just don't know. They're unaware that they're saying things that really aren't true. And I think at the lower levels, that's true. Your average pastor who's given the sermon series about how you're supposed to be a servant leader if you're a man, all that, he just got that out of the ether. He didn't develop, he really is just sort of recapitulating what's in the air. Probably hasn't really thought about it all that much. He doesn't imbibe to the culture. The people at the top, the most senior people who write a lot of the fancy books, they have 100% heard the Minority Report. So they may genuinely believe what they're saying, but it's not like they're unfamiliar with the critiques of their work. And so that was one I kind of underestimated. I kind of thought maybe, a lot of these people were just unaware and I could if I raise awareness, maybe there'll be some change. But no, they're aware. They just like what they're doing. For whatever reason. And, maybe they genuinely think it's correct. But, again, what I want to say, I want to make the point to put these points out there and say, yeah, now you're a kid. You can't claim ignorance anymore. I want to take away the claim to ignorance by people. And then I say, now you know. So you are, you can't say you didn't hear. You heard, and, Mark Driscoll gets a hard time. But he has so many great little quips in his sermons. Like one of them is what time he's like talking about, the gospel. And he's like, I always hear these objections. What about the person who lives in the Himalayan mountains who never heard about Jesus? Like, is God really against it? He's like, we're not talking about them. We're talking about you. What's your excuse? He's like, yeah, right. Put them, maybe you don't have that excuse. You actually have heard it. So what's your excuse? And so I think that's kind of the way I want to be like, take away the excuse. I didn't know, I'd never heard. Obviously I want people to do the right thing, but, and I don't think everybody should necessarily do everything I say because I'm just one data point. But I think, hearing the different perspectives and pointing out the flaws, I think is an important thing to do. Although I also want to be constructive as well. Like talking about the gating, like as an example, I want to have a constructive input, not just be, critical of others.
Right. And one of the interesting insights that you bring, that I think we do see, you mentioned Jordan Peterson, several others, yourself as well, that these are not typically who Christians have been listening to for the better part of the century. Largely, we have turned to, maybe not wrongly so, pastors, spiritual leaders, people with seminary degrees. And yet, you represent a group of people who are really laymen in the church, not trained as pastors, but you're seeing something. And I see this very much in your book. Life in the Negative World, subtitle is Confronting Challenges in an Anti-Christian Culture. You would have an interesting insight on that. And one thing that the book really does signal is that we are in for something. What did you start seeing particularly around your three worlds model, both in the original First Things article and then also as it carried through to the book? What was the genesis of this work as you saw it? What were the insights that sparked you?
Yeah, well, much like my men's insights started around 2014 was really kind of, I guess, a big year because I also came up with the germ of this idea in 2014 when I saw a friend of mine who'd been involved in creating a series of Christian short films invited me to a screening, and I went to see it, and I came away thinking, wow, they did a great job. I mean, I was kind of worried, is this going to be the amateur hour? I used to watch a lot. I mean, I watched a lot of independent cinema, and I used to watch 25 films a year. I was really into that. I'm like, please, I don't want to have to tell this guy it's good when it sucks, or something like that. But I'm like, wow, they did a great job. I mean, very professional, well done. And it was sort of aimed at college students a little bit. It's like, what is our salvation for? How do we live in this world? And it was sort of a little bit of the whole cultural engagement theory, candidly, about how, we'll be in the city for this and that sort of stuff. I don't use that phrase, but it sort of had that theme. And I'm like, this is great stuff, but the world that this is targeting is passing away. And we're about to enter into a new cultural world in which this sort of approach and these questions are going to be, not as relevant. So I went home, opened my Word document, typed in a whole bunch of bullet points, and then in 2017 wrote it up for my newsletter. And again, it went viral then. So it was popular right away. Then First Things magazine asked me to update it. They published it in their February 2022 issue. It's probably the most discussed article in the history of First Things magazine. And yeah, I think it basically it was a huge article for them. Definitely the biggest article of the year for the print edition in terms of traffic. And then, I turned it into again, the book, Life in the Negative World. So you can pick that up, wherever books are sold. Yep. Yeah. As well as, I continue to write about these ideas on my newsletter, which I should tell you is at aaronwren.com. So go to aaronrenn.com and sign up for that. But it really has become, in a sense, the way that evangelicals are starting to understand the changes in the culture there. And so I guess I just saw things changing around 2014. And I thought this men's movement was part of it. It's one of the things that was going on in the culture. But, a lot of things really shifted in the culture during President Obama's second term.
Is this that 2014?
Yeah, the 2020, the 2012 to 2015, 16 time frame. Obviously there was the Obergefell decision on gay marriage. There was the Great Awakening on race, really took off around 2014. Jonathan Haidt, the NYU professor, wrote the book The Righteous Mind. He said 2013 is when campuses started to go crazy. That's when he started noticing things get a little. I think the Trump phenomenon is in there as well. The populism rise, and it was really I can't really specify a date, but just things like gambling, large scale gambling legalization, pot legalization movement. I can't remember. I have to go look up when Colorado legalized pot, but all of these,
it's very much within that span.
Yeah, yeah. It's sort of becoming that's when it started getting mainstreamed, and so I think that there was a lot of shifts in the culture around that time where, we really entered what I call the negative world, which is this unprecedented period in the 400-year history of America where sort of official elite culture now views Christianity negatively or at least skeptically. To be known as a Bible-believing Christian is not going to help you get a job in the elite domains of society. It may not get you blackballed, but it's certainly not a help. Christian morality is sort of expressly repudiated now in many ways, seen as a threat to the new public moral order. And so this is very much a sea change for most of our history, right? It was seen as a good thing. to be known as a good church-going man. Christianity was centered in our society up through the 1950s, kind of went into decline in the 60s, but was still positive. The culture was still positive towards it by and large. Then again, in 1994 to 2014, we enter what I call the neutral world, sort of no longer positive, not really negative yet. And now we're in this negative world. And it's really kind of catching people a little bit wrong-footed as they try to figure out exactly what they're going to do in order to, adapt to that.
Why do you think it's caught us so off guard?
Well, I identify in the evangelical space three separate strategies that had been the primary ways evangelicals had engaged with the culture, dealt with the culture. What I call culture war, seeker sensitivity, and cultural engagement.
Right. Over the last, I'd say, you cover a span of about 60 years in the book.
Yeah.
Those would be the things that you're looking at in the past.
Yeah. This goes, really, I started to see this, starting in the 70s in terms of these strategies. So again, the religious right strategy, again, what you might call the non-denominational suburban megachurch strategy, which is sort of the mainstream of evangelicalism in a way. And then what I call cultural engagement, which is really the urban church movement. And you could put the emerging church in there, a lot of different things, but it's essentially it's kind of like a seeker sensitivity for the cities, combined with a much more positive attitude towards culture than the culture war people had. And so I would say seeker sensitivity and culture war started in the positive world. And in fact, they're very built around that model in a sense. So the paradigmatic culture war organization was Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority. Just the very name tells you of people who conceptualize themselves as the mainstream of society.
Right.
When Bill Hybels started Willow Creek Church in suburban Chicago, he went door to door asking people why they didn't go to church. Like, no one would ever do that today. It was just a different world. And then, of course, the cultural engagement model really was, again, the product of the neutral world. Again, you think about Tim Keller's Redeemer Presbyterian Church. It would be an example of that. Again, the emerging church would be part of that. Hey, let's all get together in a pub. Let's just have conversations, no judgmentalism. I mean, that era is kind of past too. And so these strategies are deeply rooted in particular cultural moments. And when the cultural moment shifts, then you find out that your strategies are no longer quite as effective as they used to be. And so, again, you look at the cultural engagement, it was sort of like, oh, we can have a seat at the table and be considered legitimate parts of this sort of multicultural, pluralistic urban environment. Yeah. And now it's like, you're all just bigots, just like Jerry Falwell, in a sense. So it's a lot harder to do that. And, I give some examples of that in the book of people who sort of got attacked despite, you just saw it happen with Robbie George at Princeton. He's a Catholic professor there, holds a, very prestigious endowed chair.
Yeah. One of the most prestigious there at the school.
Yes. And he, Princeton is known for their dining clubs. And so some students took him to their dining club, and that club decided to change their rule about guests because he supposedly triggered some people. His very presence as this Catholic guy is considered so triggering that we can't allow him to ever be a guest at one of these clubs again. And so he's an incredible gentleman and all of these things. It's like, it doesn't matter anymore, right? And by the way, there isn't going to be another Robert George getting a position like that at Princeton in the future, right? Princeton just took Woodrow Wilson's name off the Woodrow Wilson School, which was one of their most famous schools. And so, so I think it's like an example of like, wow, the world has changed. And again, the culture war people too. I mean, and they, in my mind, none of these people have really reconciled themselves. In fact, I'm going to write an article today. It's probably going to cause me a lot of pain. Basically saying that, the state of Louisiana just passed a law that said the 10 Commandments must be displayed in all public school classrooms in the state. I think that law was a mistake. I think it was unwise. Now, do I think it's against the U.S. Constitution to do that? Well, the courts may rule that. I think, properly understood, the answer would be no. Unless you think the Constitution is just what whatever some judges say it is.
Mm-hmm.
People my age, had 10 commandments in their classroom within our lifetime. Okay. So it's like all of a sudden something is like stops being, it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
I just don't think as a prudential matter, it's such a culture war move. And in fact, I'm like actually looking up like this, man, it seems like going back to the 90s, there have been all these people who want to put up the 10 commandments in courtrooms, put up 10 commandment monuments in the green. It's just such a culture war move. It's purely symbolic. It's alienating of people. And it shows that people have not broken out of the culture war, mindset in a sense. And so I do think that that's an example. They're all kind of mired in, once you start, and this affects me as much as anyone else. It's something to think about, is how you build your career or your ministry ultimately sort of limits what you're able to do, because you build it on a certain set of strengths and paradigms. And then, and structures and assumptions. And then when the world changes, how do you reinvent yourself? It is incredibly difficult.
Especially the larger you
yourself.
are as a church or an organization, it is more difficult to pivot and to navigate cultural changes like what we are living in. I do agree with you.
Yeah. Well, you think about obviously your student organization is schools. And, when you're in your 20s, like your career and your life is still very plastic in a sense. It's unformed. So you can get a job in one field coming out of college, and you can move to another field pretty rapidly. If you don't like this career, you can get a lot of different jobs. And so I think that gives the illusion that you can always go do different things. And then you read these articles that say things like the average person will have 7 different careers in their life, not just jobs, careers.
Right.
But the truth is, it is extraordinarily difficult after the age of 30 to fundamentally change your career. The people I know who've done it, one, you kind of a little bit have to start over at the bottom again, in some respects. You might have to go back to school, pay for an expensive graduate degree to get to a credential with no guarantee that it's going to work. And, I'm someone who has kind of successfully changed what I'm doing multiple times. And I'm telling you, do not underestimate how difficult it is to change what you're doing after about age 30. You get set. I can't quote the exact same, but I would recommend everyone listening look up Henry Kissinger's undergraduate thesis. And the first 2 paragraphs of Henry Kissinger's undergraduate thesis are amazing. He talks about,
it's good.
At some point, you wake up one day and you realize that the world that seemed like it had endless possibilities has now shrunk to the one particular path that you were on. And that there were many possibilities that are no longer possibilities for you. And that sneaks up on you. And that's one of the reasons that you end up in a midlife crisis in that 35 to 45-year-old era. So your life's going to change, your perspectives are going to change. There's a lot into that. So I think it's like, it's easy to say, well, why didn't these guys pivot? It's hard to pivot. Very hard, extremely hard to pivot. Now, a lot of these guys, I think, could have done a better job than they did because they are, in a sense, anti-fragile in the sense that they're independently wealthy. A lot of these pastors have had book contracts, speaking gigs. They've got enough money and they have donors who can finance, what they do. They're not, even if they had to like dramatically shrink what they were doing to go do something else, they could do it because it's not like, well, I got a family to feed here and I can't do that. So for like the rank and file person, it's a lot harder because like, I have a job, I have kids, like I can't just
and no other means of income.
Yeah. So but once you've got like a certain amount of money in the bank, which most of these top guys I think probably do, they've done all right for themselves. All of a sudden you have possibilities. Even Mark Driscoll was able to start a new church after his old one collapsed because people were willing to back. He had backers. And so they didn't want to, and you often see like how few people are less brave than the billionaire class in terms of being willing to do it. It's like how many. This has been said on Twitter many times. Look at how many people have the proverbial "fu" money who never actually say it because they're still terrified of like anybody thinking a bad thought about them. So there is a massive lack of courage, but don't underestimate how difficult it is for people to change. And so what usually happens is, when the cities came back, for example, in the 1990s, when we entered the neutral world, it wasn't the old culture war, earth seeker sensitivity guys that pivoted into urban ministry. It was a new group of people, a new group of entrepreneurs who were able to meet that. So I think we'll see, it's like the innovator's dilemma. It's the old Clayton Christensen innovator's dilemma. Worth reading. It's gotten a lot of criticism, that thesis, but there's something to it. The old corporations can't innovate when the new technology comes. That's why we have to have startups. And so there's something like that in life. And so, once you've had this whole edifice of evangelicalism, it's built on particular paradigms. And the legacy institutions are probably not going to reform, realistically. They will probably ride out their models into the sunset, and it will be new people, new things that arise. Now, will that successfully happen? It's unclear, but I'd like to think that it will at some point.
Hey, dads, we're all doing our best to raise young men who follow the Lord, have a committed faith, and prioritize their spiritual growth. And if you're a dad like me, you're always looking for ways to get your son involved in things that can help him do just that. Now, I've personally witnessed that working camp is one of the best ways for young men to cultivate not only a strong work ethic, but to be surrounded by like-minded believers their own age who can fan their faith more into flame. Lifeway, friend of the show and sponsor for Man to Men, offers 3 incredible summer camp experiences in Fuge Camps, Student Life Camp, and CentriKid. They're always looking for young men who love the Lord to join their staff each and every summer. So dads, here's your reminder. Drop a hint, encourage your college-age son to step out of his comfort zone next summer and consider working camp. We are all partnering with you to raise young men who can do hard but new and good things for themselves and their faith. You can visit studentlife.com, fuge.com, CentriKid.com, and we'll put those links in the show notes for you to check out more and share with your own son. Man to Men listeners are involved in and leading impactful organizations across the country. So I wanted to ask you guys, is your church, ministry, or nonprofit seeking more laborers for a plentiful harvest? Imagine the transformative impact of integrating passionate young leaders into your mission, each of them eager to make a significant difference. Friend of the show and our sponsor, Reliant Mission, can assist you in creating your own financially support-based residencies, all tailored to your needs. Reliant provides world-class training and coaching for these young leaders to successfully raise their support. They also manage all the employment logistics, freeing your organization to focus on the ministry work that God has called you and your new residents to. If you're looking to expand your team and your impact by equipping and empowering young leaders, visit reliant.org/partner, that is RELIANT.org/partner, to learn how they can support your efforts. You are speaking the entrepreneur's language, as you describe this. You describe the opportunities. In fact, a lot of our listeners, Aaron, are on large college campuses. They are members of our fraternity, or they're kind of within that age bracket, or they've just graduated. Many of our listeners are also serving or leading in major industries. You give what I think are some of these hopeful recommendations in your book, things like how to live in the negative world, like become resilient, become excellent, pursue institutional integrity, pursue community, be a light. One of my favorites, I would love to hear you describe this one, is be prudentially engaged. Would you take 2 or 3 of those and just kind of walk our men through all these listeners that range from collegiates to retirees over how you see us impacting a negative world?
Sure. So being prudentially engaged, that was the last chapter of the book, was sort of on Christian politics and like how should we interact with the culture. And so there seem to be 2 major approaches to that. The culture war approach is double down. The theory of the culture war, people, is the reason that the culture war didn't work is because Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson were just too nice of guys. And they didn't fight hard enough. And we're going to take the gloves off now. We're going to be like Donald Trump. If we just fight to win, we could do that. I happen to think that tremendously undersells those previous people. And I think it's easy to make statements like that when you're small and don't have any institutional connections or considerations. Once you start to become big and you have like coalitions to manage and people you're working with, then you have to take that into account. You can't be like, it's just, it's crazy. And of course, Donald Trump is a phenom that we will never see his like again in American politics, most likely. A true larger than life character, truly unique in what he was able to accomplish.
And you've even discussed, and some in the book, and I've heard you elsewhere, discuss some of what you describe as the three worlds allowed for a world where someone like that would come into such prominence.
I always say this.
That would not have been acceptable
right.
A decade or generation ago.
Yeah. But that's why Donald Trump didn't actually he's been talking about running for president since the 80s.
That's true.
That's
true.
Like he didn't really have like a real candidacy ever until 2015. Why? He saw that the world had changed. He saw, I now have a path. So Donald Trump is a product of the negative world, which I think is one of the great ironies, because the people who most dislike religious Christianity are the ones that promoted the world that made Trump possible. But one strategy, again, of engagement is double down on culture war. The other strategy is what I call disengagement. And this one you don't really see it directly stated that way, but you hear a lot of essentially Anabaptist statements like, this world is not our home. We're not citizens of the United States of America. We're citizens of the kingdom of heaven. We lose down here. Jesus didn't come to exercise power. Jesus came to give up power. So you hear all these things like that, typically said by people who in their own spheres exercise quite a lot of power and who are quite militant about certain cultural matters like racism. So they're, I don't really take this seriously per se, but they're basically like, well, we just need to, keep our heads down and not pick fights with the culture and just, talk about social justice in our churches. It's sort of it's the more urban. This is the response to the people who are in these urban environments, who are in this more high pressure thing. It's like, how can we avoid getting in trouble? Is kind of how I see it. I think both of those are a mistake. I think we need to remain engaged, politically, et cetera. But it has to be, again, what I call a matter of prudence, which is say wisdom. That is to say, we have to be aware of the times. Just like, we need to know the Ecclesiastes. There's a time to kill, a time to heal. There's a time to build up, a time to tear down. There's a time where there are different times out there, and we're in different times than we were. And so we need to take account of that. And one of the things I would say is, while I don't think this complete disengagement model is correct, I do think we need to recognize when you're a minority, you need to focus more internally, less externally.
Right.
And that's where, being more of a strong counterculture is going to be very, very important. We also have to pick our battles, I think, in the culture war. But we also, you can't let people gaslight you into certain things. So I think there's a lot of people who very militantly think, it's the flip side of the old, you must vote Republican because of abortion. They're like, you couldn't, no Christian can vote for Donald Trump. Yeah, you can vote for Donald Trump, if you choose. But maybe there isn't a great candidate. So what do? Do we vote for one of the two candidates? Do we write in something? Do we abstain? People are going to come to different conclusions on that. I don't think this is something where the church can be directive. I don't think it's a matter of I think it's a matter of conscience, but it's not a matter of indifference, which is to say, we will be judged and held accountable for what we do in this realm. But it's not something where I think we can be directive and say, you must do this. I think when we're in this, we're sort of in startup mode for the negative world. We are sort of exploring an unknown territory. And
Yes,
we need to
it
have
feels
that.
way.
We need to have that exploration mindset, which means we don't have all the answers right now. But I don't think running away is really a strategy. Nor do I think the direct confrontation strategy is, in general, the right one either. And again, I make this point in the book. One last thing I will say this point is we cannot conflate the electoral prospects of the Republican Party with the status of Christianity in America. I think that those two have been linked in a lot of people's mind because evangelicals and a lot of Catholics, of course, vote Republican. And so the idea like, oh, Trump might win. Well, that tells you we're not in a negative world. Well, first off, Trump is, hardly, the Christian prince of Stephen Wolfe's book. A
bastion of Christian values.
I mean, it's what you see, like the online right, the young men today, they're very right wing in many respects, but they're not Christian at all. Some of them, like the Barstool conservatives, they're sort of like the old South Park conservatives. They're just bros, who want to get drunk and watch sports and gamble and have lots of sex, but they don't want people telling them what to do. Trump's kind of a little bit of that kind of guy himself. I see, got that. Then again, you have this more, kind of dissident right, manosphere type people. Many of them basically think Christianity is bad. They don't like it. They explicitly argue against it. A lot of the base of Trump supports are people who call themselves evangelicals but never go to church. So if you read J.D. Vance's memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, he talks about all his family members who talk about God, but they never go to church, and they're not particularly religious people. They don't live religiously. And so there's a lot of those people too. And, the Chamber of Commerce Republicans are certainly not interested in any Christian religion. So you go down the line, the big factions that are increasingly going to make up, it's a post-Christian right. And, that's really going to reshape politics, I think, coming forward. Particularly in light of the facts that abortion is now a proven electoral loser. I think that the ability of religious Republicans to sort of hold to that issue in their candidates, I think it's going to be less possible today than it was prior to Roe versus Wade, because now these guys are going to see that, well, I'm going to lose if I'm too abortion restrictive. And so self-preservation is going to trump everything for those folks.
So how do we follow one of your other dictums in the book, which is to pursue institutional integrity? You're speaking to men who are leading in institutions or will be leading in institutions.
Well, I think there are a few aspects of that. Decline in trust in institutions in America is like pervasive across the board. Nobody trusts the media. Nobody trusts Congress. And universities and, churches fall right in there. And so I think, and I want to think about, I'm going to put this more kind of in the church context. The reality is that, a lot of this decline in trust of institutions is eminently deserved. Some of our institutions are still too trusted relative to the amount of trust they deserve. And so you look at this, when you're in an environment with declining trust in institutions, you have to manage for trust. And how do you do that? You do it in a few ways. One, you're just trustworthy in your operations and your finances. So for churches, you need to actually handle abuse correctly. You shouldn't have a lot of unseemly enrichment of the pastor. A lot of things like that. You need to be aware of those things. Do you handle money well? Are you you have operational excellence and all of those things? Because
what used to be common sense, and now we have to say it out loud.
There's way too many hucksters and people, conspiracy theorists and stuff in the evangelical world. Tim Alberta, the Atlantic reporter, just wrote a New York Times bestselling book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. It's relentlessly hostile to conservative evangelicals, really in, I think, unfair ways. But the stuff he's highlighting about them behaving badly is, unfortunately reflective of a very real segment of the church. It needs to be fixed. The second thing is competence. Okay. Just look at Boeing. Okay. Oh, 737 MAX. Oh, door plugs blowing out of our airplane. Oh, our astronauts are stranded at the space station. Competence. We have a competence crisis in America. So being competent. And the third is what I call missional integrity. And I use integrity here in the sense of structural integrity. As the pressures of the negative world bear down on you, are you going to deform in your mission? And there's a lot of people who want you to change your mission. And we certainly saw this with a lot of churches. BLM hit, and all of a sudden they're all racial justice churches. And that becomes the focus. They really just, evangelicalism's, adaptability has been one of its assets, but it also kind of just gloms on to cultural trends. And, do they have any stick to it? What is your mission? Defining what your mission is, staying on mission. And that's very, very difficult. So, 2 examples from the tech industry, not even church. One was a company called Coinbase, the cryptocurrency exchange. Their CEO issued a statement, from henceforth, we're going to be a mission-driven company and we're not going to do politics at work. First off, it had to buy out like 5% of the people, his employees, when that was, there. And then, of course, they're subjected to a series of hit jobs about how they're racist in the New York Times. So if you're a company, or you're somebody that says, we're just not going to be woke, we're just going to focus on our business, you can expect to be vilified by the media, everybody. Another one was a company called Basecamp, formerly known as 37 Signals. Again, this is a left-wing company, right, run by never Trump people. And they're like, politics going so crazy. They're like, no, we're not doing that anymore. Like a third of their staff quit in a not very big company. So they lost a ton of staff over that. And so not letting look at what's going on at the Washington Post and these media things. Like the inmates are running the asylum. And so I think we all have to be aware of and taking account of market forces. That's the nature of the world. Outside information. So I want people to take my writing into account. When you're hearing complaints, you need to take them into account. But you have to understand what your mission is and act how do we integrate this in ways that understand what our mission is. And again, I'm not defining the mission for anybody, but if you don't have our business exists to do what, for example, and not letting it be hijacked by a bunch of other things. Now, of course, you also got to be.
Number of things. Yeah, we got to.
We got to be a little realistic here. There's certain things you kind of got to do to kind of be a member of good standing of society. Right. Saying we're not going to pay any attention to climate change in our company. You can do that. Maybe if you're a privately held, company, you do that. But in reality is if you're a publicly traded corporation, you simply cannot. But you can also say, wow, wait a minute. We're not going to let this totally destroy our business. Because there's a lot of people who literally don't care about your business. They probably hate capitalism anyway. And they would love to see you go out of business. And so they want your company's money to be devoted to their political priorities. And so that's going to happen over and over and over again. But again, it requires wisdom to know exactly how to navigate that. But if you can't stay on mission, you got a big problem.
Yeah. What is the immediate future that you see tracking for Christians in the U.S.? Again, as you see it, are there any signs of hope culturally that you are seeing on the landscape as you have these conversations?
Well, I don't predict the future, but and that's one of the things. There's too many crazy things. Nobody saw Trump coming. Nobody saw the war in Ukraine coming. Nobody saw this Middle East thing coming. So
yeah, I think I'm asking along the lines of how you handle information, which is I'm looking at trends. I'm looking at the arc of history that we've had up to this point. I think that's the context of my question for you.
Yeah, well, first off, I don't, what I would say is I don't think we're going to have a going out of business sale for Christianity in America. I think, I don't think we're heading for the European situation. I think we're in what I call a liminal period in which we know that the old is not working anymore, but we don't know what the next thing or things is going to be. So, for example, you could take a movement like New Calvinism, which was the hottest thing for a long time. It's very obvious that the New Calvinist movement is sort of out of gas and is fading. Many of its superstars have retired or have passed away. There isn't another crop.
It's hard to stay new forever.
Right. And so, but what's the new thing that's going to be there? we haven't really seen it. It's like we got these two old guys running for president. There's still a lot of, that. So we're in a sort of uncertain liminal phase. But what I'd say is, I always argue against this catastrophism idea that like, oh, the sky is falling, America's going to collapse. These things rarely come to pass. I'm not predicting an American collapse. I'm not predicting a church collapse. People do tend to adapt. So I think people will adapt. I do think we are sort of in a decline phase, but sometimes these things, in the 60s and the 70s, tremendous social unrest. By the 80s, there was not anymore. So if you look at the story arc of sort of, kind of more conservative versus more liberal eras, you could go from the kind of button-up to Victorian era into the 1920s, early Hollywood, pre-Hays Code Hollywood, all that stuff. Then you get into the 50s, the post-war era. It's more conformist. Then you get the 60s and the 70s, and you go back to the 80s. So like this idea that everything's going crazy, it is kind of going crazy, but that doesn't mean it's all going to go crazy forever. And, one of the things I talk about resilience, I'm very influenced by Nassim Taleb. And this idea, don't try to predict the future. Try to be resilient or even anti-fragile to whatever the future might be.
Good words.
Don't over-optimize. Don't over-optimize on a particular path that you think is going to keep going on forever. It's like, oh yeah, the subprime mortgage party is going and I'm going to cash as many tickets as I can. And all of a sudden it crashes. And that caused. So, we can't protect ourselves against every eventuality. And nor should we live in that kind of fear-based mode. But I do think less about over-indexing on a particular future around AI or something like that. We should think about in general, like, a lot of things. Like, so I think like, oh, great, getting married, having kids, being involved in church, being physically fit, not having as much debt. Thinking about that. Let's try to like save a bunch of money, which probably a lot of your guys are going to be in a position to do because they're going to get good jobs. And, realizing like, hey, my 20s, they are a time of exploration. They are a time of this stuff, but like that window closes faster than you think. Where am I? What path am I on? What track am I on? Recognizing that, like, wait a minute, you can miss your runway to getting married very easily. There's a lot there. I have a son now. I'm 54. My son is turning 7. Okay. So don't do what I did there. think about that. So there you go. That's what I'd say.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And Aaron, in the course of the conversation, you mentioned several biblical men or models. You mentioned Ezekiel, Ecclesiastes. I'm even thinking as you're talking about resiliency and reading the times, we see that in the men of Issachar. They were men who were able to read the times. Are there any biblical men or models further ones that come to mind as you coach or have these conversations on engaging the negative world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I sort of reject, and I think we have a too biblicist view of the world. That's one of the biggest issues is in evangelicalism, pastors are the experts on everything. Pastors are the authorities on everything. Everything has to be sourced to a Bible verse. And I really think that's overly limited view of the world. I think we need to have an anthropological view of creation as well. And so I think we need to draw from a much wider set of sources there. The other thing with like the Bible, it's like, Jesus has been claimed by everybody. His life is sort of a Rorschach blot that you can talk about him turning the other cheek, or you could talk about him cleansing the temple. You could talk about his, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Then you could talk about him. You see him pronouncing woes on the Pharisees.
Used by all political parties. You see them kind of bringing that in. Yeah. Here's
one paradigm from creation that I'm drawn to because I think it's very different from the way evangelicals think about the world and manhood. And we didn't even get into that, and we don't have time to get into it, but I'll say one thing. I never really thought about it, but if you go back, God brings the animals to Adam and says, Adam, what would you like to name these animals? Why don't you tell me what this animal's called? I think if you asked any evangelical today to name the animals on the earth, the first thing he would want to say is he would go, well, God, tell me what you want me to name the animals. And it would be like the opposite direction. I think God's like, Adam, I want to see what you're going to call these animals. And there is a sense in the idea of God as father. Fathers don't just want their sons to like robotically repeat dad's words. They want, you want to form them and whatever, but you want to see what they can do. Mm-hmm. This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him and what he's doing. And so I feel like going back to the creation mandate and the idea that our job, our anthropological job as men, is to extend God's creation order outward into the world. He created the animals. He did the first start at creation. Then he's like, Adam, I want you to continue this ordering process. I ordered the sun
there's a
and
charge,
the moon
a mandate given,
and the stars.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're now in charge of naming the animals. I created the animals and all the things. You name them. And so there is a sense as we need to feel empowered to go out and extend order into the world, to take dominion, to do these things, and not just do it as a sense of, well, I wonder what God wants me to name this corporation or something like that. Or where is the verse in the Bible that tells me what I should name these animals?
Right. And I think my original question is very much along those lines for sure, which is how do we live into the story of the Bible, not necessarily find a chapter and verse to support, the company I want to found or whatever.
Yeah, that's sort of that's what I feel. It's like just the mentality of like having permission, and because basically the church denies that men should do that. And again, I think we're running up at the top of the hour here, but the truth is there's so much that could be like a whole other topic, but yeah, God wants you to actually do something, and the some things that you're supposed to do, you're not going to find the answer to that always in a Bible verse. And I think it's very dangerous to just pick one Bible verse or character, because again, the times are different. You have to discern the times and all of these things there. And of course, everybody in the Bible is a sort of ambiguous character, in a lot of ways. A lot of ambiguous characters in the Bible. Imitate David. Well, there's a lot of things David did he probably shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah, definitely not in everything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
we have a lot of examples of full lives in the Bible.
Right.
I think that was the course of my question. Aaron, where can the guys check out your writing? You'd mentioned it a little earlier at the top, but I want to make sure that we get that in. If guys
go
want
to
to follow along with what you're doing. AaronWren.com.
AaronWren.com. Sign up for the newsletter. AARONRENN.com.
All right. That's great. And again, guys, the book is Living in the Negative World by Aaron Wren.
Life in the Negative World.
Life in the Negative World. Yeah. Right. He's going to help us live as we engage it. Aaron Wren, thank you so much for being our guest today. Appreciate you, man. Good conversation. Man to Men is powered by Beta Upsilon Chi, the nation's largest Christian fraternity, commonly referred to as Bucks. We exist to equip and empower college men to live faithfully and lead courageously. You can find out more about Beta Upsilon Chi by transliterating our Greek letters and adding a .org. That's BYX.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and consider giving to our work with college men across the country by following the individual partner link in the show notes. We are produced, rather well I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. Producer Bradley's at the helm over there. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.